Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real American History. I'm your host, Tess Evans, public historian, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Pilgrims and the Puritans. And one side note, I apologize if I cough during this segment because I am still getting over COVID and the flu, which I had simultaneously. So yeah, not good, but still have a lot of coughing in me to do, so I apologize in advance for that. But I want to actually start by totally ignoring the word pilgrim for a minute. Let's just put that out of our minds, and you'll find out later why. Instead, I want to focus first on two groups, the Puritans and the Separatists. So, when we talk about the Puritans, we have to talk about a little bit of the history of England. So England was a Roman Catholic nation until about the 1530s or so, when King Henry VIII declared himself to be head of the church, called the Church of England. So he and his daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, moved this church away from a lot of the traditions that were being held in the Roman Catholic Church. So, and, there were some who thought that these changes didn't even go far enough to divide the two churches. And these people called for a less structured form of worshiping. In essence, they wanted to purify the Church of England. Thus, they became known as the Puritans. So there was actually a second group of Puritans who were actually more extreme. They thought that the Church of England was beyond reform, and it wasn't even worth trying to reform anymore. And these people were known as Separatists because they sought to form the separate church congregations, their own congregations. Now, this was actually a form of treason because it was illegal to be part of any other church in England. So after persecution and torture for some, Separatists ended up migrating to Holland and stayed there for about over a decade or so. But after a time, Holland was actually on the brink of war itself, and the Separatists were experiencing a lot of economic hardship. So they voted on whether or not to basically found their own colony in the New World, so in the Americas, where they could essentially worship freely. And they entered into agreements with investors who ended up financing their trip, and they set sail on a ship called the Speedwell. But after setbacks and almost giving up, and some even actually stayed in Holland, eventually there were 102 passengers who left in 1620 on a rented ship called the Mayflower. And the passengers, about which 20 were women, 30 were children, and fewer than 50 were men, and they were mostly older men. There were a few adventurers on board who weren't separatists, who ended up causing a few problems. So they had a leader named William Bradford, who wrote a book called Of Plymouth Plantation, in which he describes the 30 years of living there. And so we have a lot of great information based on this primary source. So during their voyage, like most voyages across the Atlantic, they experienced a terrible storm. A lot became sick, they suffered, but they did not turn back. They decided to keep going. And their destination was the Hudson River Valley, now known as New York. But at this time, that area was still considered the northern tip of Virginia. So they carried with them a patent that gave them permission to settle in Virginia. However, they ran off course and ended up at Cape Cod in what is now Plymouth, Massachusetts. And because they settled there in Massachusetts and not in Virginia like the patent ordered, the patent became null and void. Thus, they had to basically write their own governing document, and this became known as the Mayflower Compact. Now, this compact was an agreement between all on board to basically come together and act as an organized body to promote order and obedience. And it's actually referred to as the first constitutional document excuse me, of the New World. So the Separatists are trying, desperately to survive, and about 4 months in, they come in contact with indigenous peoples, the Wampanoag. And in March of 1621, both groups signed a treaty of mutual protection. So it listed 6 points. Neither party would harm the other. Punishments would be enacted for theft. When meeting, both groups had to leave their weapons behind. They would serve as each other's allies in times of war. And if one member hurt a member of the other group, that member would be punished. And they all needed to agree to this treaty. Excuse me. Now, let's go back to the word pilgrim. So references to the term crops up when a boy is born after they arrive and his parents name him peregrine, which means traveling far away, as well as pilgrim. So journal entries also describing the treaty use the word pilgrim to describe those who lived in Plymouth. William Bradford calls the group pilgrim when they leave Holland. But the term wasn't used to describe the entire group of separatists on the Mayflower who came over until the 1800s. So in the 1630s, a group of Puritans sailed to New England under the charter of the Massachusetts Bay Company and formed the Massachusetts Bay Colony north of Plymouth. John Winthrop was its first governor, and he declared himself to reforming the wicked world as he saw it, arguing that, quote, the life which is most exercised with trials and temptations is the sweetest and will prove the safest, end quote. He helped lay out towns, each with its own church, and he settled Boston, which quickly became the capital and chief port of Massachusetts. So that is it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed learning. For questions, comments, or to recommend a topic for me to cover, just shoot me an email at realahistory@gmail.com. And be sure to check out the sources and links where you can learn more in the description, and I have a few books listed as well. I will see you on the next episode. Until then, hope you all take care. Bye-bye.